hometown radio station since 1949, WRMN AM 1410 and 96.7 FM.
Negative K, nothing further, just kitty Camby in the corner.
It is time for Fridays with the Finest here on this Friday morning here in downtown Elgin. One great show to another. And we welcome you to this on WRMN AM 1410 and on YouTube on a Friday morning. Chief Anna Lalley is here with some guests this morning as we welcome you to the weekend. Hi, Chief. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Making it.
Yeah, I was just we were just talking about your America's Fest yesterday, First Responder Fest, and I want to just say first, thank you again for doing it. This is your fourth year, right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, we were just talking about the ladies and I, so this is your fourth year. So thank you for what you do for us. We appreciate it. It's a lot of work, so I want you to know that we do appreciate it, and we see the work that you put into it, and you don't have to do it. So the fact that you want to do it to honor first responders. I think that shouldn't go unnoticed. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for all the help you guys have.
Absolutely.
You've always been like, anything you need, let me know.
Yes, anything you need, including, is the dunk tank going?
We have not officially canceled the dunk tank yet.
So I asked Commander Lencioni, I said, oh, you got wrapped into it, huh? She says, yeah, and Alton, and then Sergeant Gutierrez, too. So it'll be good. I mean, it will. I think she was going to get in her diving wetsuit or something like that if it was too cold. I was like, well, better you than me. So thank you, Heather.
Not everybody has a diving wetsuit.
No, she's a avid diver. So she's.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, she's also first up in the dunk tank.
Well, I think she wants to be first up for a reason. We talked about that too. Yes. Yeah.
Well, we'll see. We have not officially canceled the dunk tank yet.
All right. Well, I look forward to hitting that button. I'm not even going to throw anything. I told her I'm just going to walk up and
cheat?
go boop. Yes, I am. I'm going to.
To make sure she gets in?
Yes.
Wow.
I told her I'm not, hey. Yeah. But it's all in good fun.
Well, thanks for being on stage tomorrow with Under Sheriff Amy Johnson from Kane County.
Yep.
We look forward to the stage presentation. That'll be at 1 o'clock tomorrow.
Yes, and I will be there. So thank you again.
65 degrees.
I think that's good, though.
Yeah.
There was
for a lot
one
of things
year,
it is.
Oh, yeah. I think it was the first year when we were on stage and it was hot and the sun was beating down. Yeah, so, I mean, I like that. 65 is... I like that.
It's what I would have expected for when we used to have it at the end of
October,
September,
right?
early October. Now it's early September and we're getting a rare 65-degree day, but that's cool. That's fine.
Yeah, it'll be great. It's going to be a great, great event. So.
Yeah, well, thanks.
So I have a couple guests with me today, and I really want to kind of get into what we want to talk about here. But before I do that, I want to just hit a couple quick things. So. The arrest that was made in the weapons investigation at Elgin High School. So just let me give the information that we pushed out on our social media. September 4th, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, our school resource officer who was assigned there, Detective Beth Steriker, she was notified by the school staff that they observed a possible firearm in the possession of a student in the building. So she made contact with the student, and the unloaded firearm was recovered without any incident. I want to say, too, a couple other things. So it's a 15-year-old male. That 15-year-old male was arrested, taken into custody. That juvenile was transported to the police department, then ultimately charged and taken to the Cook County Youth Detention Center. The charges are 3 counts of aggravated unlawful use of a weapon and then 1 count of unlawful use of a weapon. There were no threats to the students or staff, so when we pushed that information out on our social media, I think it was like 11:30 at night.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, so I want to just make sure that people are aware and understand kind of what's going on. Yes.
At that time?
So the arrest is made. Again, by the time the arrest is made with juveniles, there's not much more that I can say other than what I'm telling you because we have to be sensitive to juveniles' rights.
Right.
So in summary, that's the case. I want to stress no threats to students or staff. The SRO, which is why we have school resource officers in schools.
Right.
She did an exceptional job. But by the time the juvenile is arrested, by the time we contact parents, there's a whole, it's not, when you arrest an adult, you don't have to be mindful of any type of issues with statements that they may make without the parents' awareness. There's a lot of safeguards in place for juveniles that are arrested. So by the time we notify the parents, by the time we make contact with the Cook County State's Attorney, by the time we make contact with the Cook County Youth Detention Center, This juvenile was not transported down there until 11, so 11 o'clock at night. So I think
Okay.
I was notified around that time, and then subsequently we wanted to make sure that they were going to be detained and then push that information out. And I also want to stress too, there isn't and was not any type of immediate threat to the school because the incident was resolved. There was no, so there's no immediate threat where we need to push it out right away, right? So it's very different, as I've said many times. If there's an active threat, we absolutely push that out right away. But the incident was, here's notification, the school resource officer makes an arrest, and we're done. So.
But it was enough of an interesting.
To notify the public.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, and because you have to be mindful, too, that was the day of the shooting in Georgia,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So we are very aware and very in tune of national events and how they can correlate to things here in Elgin. And again, this will generate public interest, as we expect it to. But again, I've stressed many times, too, there's a time and place to push the information out to make sure that the parents are aware. There's safeguards in place for the juvenile, making sure on the legal end that charges are authorized. So, that's kind of a little bit of the time frame. What U46 does, again, we're partners with them, but I don't control what U46 does in terms of their social media or their messaging. For the police department, we know that this will generate interest. And so when the appropriate time comes and the right time with safeguards in place, we push that information out to the public. So if anyone has any questions, the Courier did an article, I think yesterday, because we received a FOIA request, so there was some other additional information too, but generally that, I just wanted to highlight it, summarize it, and let people know, what had occurred.
And as far as I guess this is probably a U46 issue and not a police issue, but when something like that happens with a gun in a school and a student, does that student eventually return to that school?
That's up to the school. Yeah. So the officers, school resource officers, it's a very fine line and very clear line. The school administers discipline in terms of any type of student code of conduct, and then we are there just for criminal issues, which is why you can't have officers. We have parameters, right? Search and seizure laws. That guide us in our conduct, where the school, they're not acting as agents of law enforcement. So the administrators in the school can do some things more so than we can, right? So there's a balance there. So the school administers discipline. What they choose to do is their decision.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure people had that information.
Okay. And I don't know, we also had someone who was shot last week. I'm not sure if that was on your list or not, but I wanted to.
Yeah. So the last was on August 31st in the 400 block of Preston.
Yeah.
An adult male was shot, non-life-threatening injuries. That case remains under investigation. If anyone has any information, 847-289-2600. You can also text a tip to 847-411 and just put Elgin PD in the subject line. So, again, check our transparency site for any updates. If we do make an arrest, we'll push that out on social media. I do want to mention, too, we had our first event for our transparency site on the 4th at the Senior Center, and it was well attended.
It was?
Yes.
Good.
So we have two coming up, September 10th at New Life Covenant Church on East Chicago Street, and then we have the one on the 18th at the Moose Lodge. So if you can make it, and remember, there's tacos, so, right, highlight that there's food, there's tacos. But it was well attended. I talked to Danny, and I know Ryan was there and pushing out the information. So Ryan Drake, who's our crime analyst, was there kind of giving an overview.
It's 6 to 7, and September 11th.
Yep.
I think you said the 10th. But the 11th at New Life Community Church, 1580 East Chicago Street, and then the 18th at the Moose Lodge. I think that's the one I'm probably going to go to.
And I would really encourage people because, again, there's a lot of good information on there. And it's really like we're pushing it as the source of information and the hub of information. So, but with that, I want to kind of get into my guests today and give them enough time here. So, we're looking good here. Today I want to kind of just give an introduction to something that the initiative that the Elgin Police Department has been working on, and really kind of where we are in the process now of really launching it. So about a year ago or so, we started having some conversations internally with cold cases. So, what are we doing with cases that go unsolved? And specifically cases that are homicides, missing persons, sexual assault, so your high-profile cases. So, based on that, the department, I decided to allocate some resources to creating a cold case unit. And two detectives with me here today. They are going to introduce themselves here in a second, but we have created a cold case unit, and really this unit is focused on cases, again, sexual assaults, homicide cases, long-term missing cases, or unidentified remains, with a time frame of 3 or more years where there isn't any solvability, right? So we haven't been able to make an arrest, we haven't closed it out. So when you start a unit from the ground up, this is the first time that the Elgin Police Department has done a cold case unit. We used to touch cold cases every now and then. Our detectives, amongst the many, many things that they do, we would say, hey, take a look at this cold case, while you're working your 20 caseload, right?
Right. So it doesn't get a whole lot of attention.
It doesn't. So it's time. It's time to dedicate those resources and to do it the right way. And so, I'm going to have the detectives introduce themselves and talk a little about who they are. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, what this unit looks like, what we're planning to do, how we're going to be asking for the community's assistance, so things like that. So do you want to start, Matt?
Yeah, my name's Detective Matt Vartanian. I've been with Elgin for about 16 and a half years.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
My name's Detective Andrew Houghton. I've been a police officer for 17 years. The last 10 years I've been in our major investigations division as a detective. I know Matt was in our gang unit and some other things prior to coming over to this.
He gave you your background, right?
Yes.
He did that for you. That's a good partner. So in terms of how we started this, right? So, let's talk a little bit about what this unit is going to do and what you guys have been. You've been in these positions for probably about 3 months.
3 to 4 months, yeah.
So talk a little bit about, and for the public, right? Cold cases, and I kind of gave the definition. This is what this unit will focus on, right?
Yeah.
So talk a little bit about what the last 3 months has, what have you been doing and how are you getting this unit kind of started?
Yeah, I think for us, it was just trying to kind of figure out where do we start? What's our foundation with everything that we have? Like we talked about with the 4 categories, we just kind of had to figure out of those different, categories, what falls into that with what we have to do. And then where do we start? Like, where do we even begin with it? How do we figure out where everything is at in the department? Because we're going back and we're talking about cases that are back from the 1970s.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's trying to figure out, okay, what do we have? What don't we have? What do we need? Who do we contact to figure out what we can get? So just kind of the basics for all that stuff.
Yeah, our homicide cases go back to 1970. That's the earliest cold case homicide that we have on our file. I'm sure we have things from the 60s and 50s and things like that, but
You started
in
with
terms
the
of us
70?
having cases that we were able to look up and get a hold of, we have from 1970 to now. We currently have 40 cold case homicides that we're looking at. A lot of the last couple of months has been going through bankers' boxes of, handwritten forms, microfilm, microfiche, because it's a lot of older case files. So it's been trying to organize that in a way that, A, we can digitize it so we have a record of it, and we can provide it to the state's attorney's office or scan it to different people if we need to do that. And then determining how many cases we have, because we have other homicides that were closed. We have homicides where someone was arrested, the suspect was known but was deceased, things like that wouldn't necessarily meet our criteria. And then looking back to our sex assaults, the earliest sex assault kits that we have are from 1996. So we kind of focus from 1996 to now, because we're going to want, if we're going to go back and look at those cases, we need some sort of physical evidence. So having sex assault kits that were sent off where maybe there's not a DNA hit in the database yet, but we've submitted stuff to the database, we want to relook at those cases. So we have 26 of those right now. And then for cold case missing persons, more than 3 years, we have 5 currently. So we're looking back at those cases as well. But it was kind of going through and determining what met our criteria, and then physically, what case files do we have? What evidence do we have? Getting our office set up, having things where we can reasonably work with the different information that we have for us to move forward. In terms of missing person, in terms of human remains, we don't currently have any. I talked to the coroner's office. They have 1 unidentified missing remains in Kane County, but it's not ours. But certainly if we were to come across unidentified remains in a forest preserve or something, that would be something we would take a look at as well.
So the premise of this unit, again, is to really make a concerted effort and a focus effort on, if a case happened in 1970, and that's, with the evolution of forensics in policing, right? If you ask somebody I think the O.J. Simpson trial was probably the pinnacle of where you introduce DNA to people and they have no idea what it is, right? So if you remember that trial, if you ever watched any part of it, when they're talking about DNA, people are just like, what is this? Because it's so relatively new.
Yeah.
You talk about DNA now, people are like, oh yeah, I watched it on the cold case files,
Yeah.
right? I mean, I know you're an avid fan of these true crime stories.
This is fairly fascinating to me.
Yes,
Yeah.
I know that. So, and I think it's fascinating to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I love this part of police work, right? I think it's so interesting. Not only that, but what an opportunity, especially it's important for me. There are people in our community that have no closure on their case. So this case may have happened 20 years ago or 25 years ago, and for that family, for those loved ones, they probably think about it every single day. So it's time for us to recognize that and put some resources and try to do what we can. Closure either way. We've made an arrest, or there's nothing more we can do, right? Because when you're kind of in that limbo, that's where it gives, where your grief just never ends, where you're never able to kind of try to, be at peace with some of the things. So, what these gentlemen are doing are really just kind of, taking the time. And when you say you guys are going literally through cases, so talk a little bit about, I find this interesting too. So 1970s, just pick a random case. And you don't have to give the details, but what did the case file look like in terms of photos, reports? Talk a little bit about that.
A lot of stuff that was before our time, things that are handwritten, pictures that are Polaroids. Some of it is stuff that you can't even read because of the individuals that have written it at the time. That's just how they did police work back in the day. And the thing that I think is interesting is some of these cases, everybody that touched that case originally, I mean, some of these people are dead. They're not even around anymore. So it's not like you could pick up the phone, have a conversation with them and ask them, hey, what did you do? What did this person say? And even if you do find somebody, it's so far removed that they might forget that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of, I like to think we're both pretty organized people. It's a matter of looking at something and being like, okay, we got some work to do here. How do we centralize everything? I mean, everything that we deal with now, it's all digitized. Everything's on a computer as far as records go. So it's trying to make sure that we get all of that pulled into our new system and just organized. So we kind of have that good platform to work off of with what we have to do.
And you're looking at evidence, back in the 70s, they may have collected items that could potentially yield some sort of DNA that were never tested because that technology didn't exist then. So we're going back to see if we have cases where there's items of evidence that could potentially be sent to the lab now with new technology to identify a DNA profile, things like that. Or DNA technology has changed since 1993 when the O.J. Simpson case was. So we may have had things that we sent off for DNA in 1990 or 2000 that 25 years later we can resubmit with new technology and get better results. So a lot of it's going through and seeing what do we physically have in evidence, what can we do with the state lab or with the private lab if we choose to do that, and what type of information can we get from those items that we still have, because every homicide case, when we collect evidence, we have to retain that evidence forever. Even if the case is closed, we still have boxes of evidence for cases where the offender was charged, the offender's dead, and the case is closed. We still have to hold on to that physical evidence. So we have boxes of evidence from the 1970s, from these murders, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, that still sit in our evidence room. It's just going back through those and determining, is there new evidence that we can get out of that old evidence?
And I think that's you have to dedicate, you can't just have a detective say, here, take this case file, and, think about the number of hours that you have to spend just to decipher what is in this case file. I mean, I remember, back when I was a sergeant in our major investigations, this is years ago, and myself and another detective were looking at a cold case, and as much as we wanted to spend time and dedicate time to it, I'm running a unit, I'm a sergeant, right? And so my time was very limited. And then the detective was just doing his day-to-day cases just to keep up, right? So having two dedicated detectives who can spend the time, and making sure that, we're doing everything that we should in terms of technology, leveraging federal partners such as the FBI, but then more importantly, and most importantly, the community. So, we are in the process of building out on our Transparency Hub a cold case page. So every cold case that we have, we're going to be putting information out to the public and saying, here's what it is. Here's a very high-level summary. here's what we, kind of where we're at. And then eventually, as we're working on some cases that are generating leads, building that out. And eventually, we talked this morning for about 45 minutes and some of the stuff, doing a monthly podcast. And talking about, having the detectives talk about these cases, bringing people on from the cases, getting community members involved. So, a lot of times cold cases, they are solved in a couple ways. One, DNA does, some type of forensic analysis does it for you. And if my DNA is not on file, my fingerprints are not on file, you are virtually an unknown, right? So a lot of times I think people have this misnomer of like, well, just take their DNA and then run it through this database. And then, what you see on some of these crime shows that are not true crime, but like, CSI, right? The CSI effect. People think, just take the evidence, 30 minutes later, put the screen up, boop, 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 there you go, right? That's not how it works. Not yet, right? Like eventually you never know. So forensics or some type of, that can solve a case. Somebody comes forward. And if you look at some of the cold cases that have happened throughout the country, it's usually that one piece of information where someone comes forward and somebody's dedicated to getting that information and then really kind of taking the time to, vet out what exactly was going on there. Or the person confesses, right? So usually that's how you're going to solve a cold case. Otherwise, they remain cold cases. So with you guys, as you're looking at through some of the cases, and when we do launch our transparency site, I think within the next month, we're hoping, our podcast maybe within the next couple months here, we're going to continue to talk about this and generate that interest from our community, right? We have tons of people in Elgin who are very vested in the police department, and we can leverage that, right? And getting people involved and saying, here's the information. And you never know what that one little piece of information might be that breaks open a case. So for you guys, what's important for you in terms of getting the community involved? And what kind of, eventually when we build this out and we start getting leads, what are things that you would want the community to know? What kind of information is helpful to you? Like, talk a little bit about the community part.
We're going through the process of trying to get photographs of all of our victims because we all think, that humanizes that person. This is not just a piece of paper or a bunch of letters and words on a page. It's an actual person who was killed or is missing. And while you have that victim, you also have victims within that person's family, coworkers, friends who want to know what happened to that missing person or what happened to their loved one who was murdered. So getting photographs of all those different people that we can put onto our transparency site helps us humanize who those people are. And so we're reaching out to families, or if anybody listening has photos of people who were victims in our cases, we'd love to have those so that we can present those with information about those people's cases. Because as the chief said, on our transparency site, we're also going to have a tip line where people can provide us tips. And no tip is too small. If people think, hey, I heard this and I never said anything about it at the time, or I've heard this through the grapevine, like, we will follow those leads to the end result that we can. So making sure that people feel comfortable giving us that information and giving them a venue to give us the information is really important.
When you are prioritizing, it's just you two guys in the unit? Yeah. So,
got to start somewhere.
yeah, right, I get it. So there's 40 murder cold cases, 26, you said sexual assaults, I think, and then 5 missing persons. That's 71. So where do you start? Which ones take priority? And because when you do something like this, don't you have to steadily focus on one for a while? Like if you are working on one case and then you start working on another case and you don't get back to this one for 6 months, then you might have forgotten some of the things. You've lost your momentum a little bit, right?
We do have a matrix of different scoring mechanisms, basically, so that we are not just focusing on cases where there is no solvability, because unfortunately some of these cases will probably never be solved. But what we're trying to look at is, as we're going through and finding these 40 cases, is diving into each case and saying, okay, is there DNA available for this case? Was there a suspect at the time for this case? Are victims, witnesses, officers involved in the case still alive? Is there ballistic evidence that we can relook at? So we're trying to find out different things in that specific case to sort of score it to see if it has more solvability than a different case does, if that makes sense.
Yeah. This is going to be interesting. But I think, and I think the podcast would be actually make a decent radio show. It might be something we wouldn't mind carrying here on the station.
Yeah,
but,
great.
Yeah. But it's like, unlike when you're doing investigations, like after a homicide that's just happened, and there's a lot of things you're not disclosing. This would be a situation where there's a lot of things
Yes.
you want to disclose, right? Because you're not
Yes.
really trying to hide anything
Yes.
anymore. This is a cold case.
Yes.
And if you don't disclose it, it's going to stay a cold
Yes,
case.
and
right?
that's the difference. And I think
Yeah.
that's where, when we eventually build this site and you start seeing some of the information that we now can release to the public, right? Many, many years have gone by. So there's not that immediacy or urgency where you're, if I come on the radio show and I've done it, right, whenever we've had cases, I said, not yet. I can tell you this right now because the detectives are trying to make an arrest, right? And they're not going to be happy if the chief of police goes on her radio show and starts disclosing. I can assure you they're not going to be happy. And they're
Yeah.
going to tell me that they're not happy, which is why I don't do it. So, but now with this, right, you're absolutely right. The more information that we can give to the public, you never know what could generate a lead. So you're talking about cases, what'd you say, the 1970 was the earliest
Yeah, I
that we
think so.
have?
Yeah.
So people are, if you're born in the 1970, you're in your 50s here, right?
Yeah.
So now you start thinking about some of the detectives, that have passed away. The officers are not even here. If there are cases where we can tap into our retired officers and say, hey, you were the lead detective. Like, urgency and time is also important, right? Because eventually people are not around. Eventually people don't remember, even in the department, right? With Matt and Andrew now kind of taking the lead on this, and they have, long time left still in their career, they're now getting, immersed into when they do retire and somebody is, hey, do you remember this case? He said, yeah, this is what we did. This is how we did it, right? But now you look at some of these cases and you're like, how did somebody even sign off on this report, right? Like, and then you realize, and as in most cases, that first 24 to 48 hours is the most crucial. And if you look at some of the cases nationally that have not been solved, the John Benet Ramsey case is the one that everyone highlights, right? Some of the things that happened with the initial response, some of the things that happened thereafter, and here you are 20-something years later and that case isn't solved. So we're trying to avoid some of that stuff, and I think for us to dedicate some time and resources is step one. So
Yeah.
we have a couple minutes left, guys, not even. So
Yeah.
anything that you guys would like to say? And
Yeah. We'll always hold back some information, like just strategically we have to do that, but we do want to provide as much information as we can to the public so that people can give us information. And some of these cases, I think if you look at a lot of our 90 to 2015, I think our most recent cold case that fits our criteria is 2015. A lot of those may be gang related, and we may have situations where people have moved on. They've grown up and they're 10, 15 years older now. They have families. Maybe they aren't in that lifestyle anymore. So if those types of people that have come to that point in their life where they've turned their life around and not involved in that type of lifestyle have information, we would like that information because we're still looking at some of these cases where a lot of people maybe aren't thinking about those cases, but we are and those families are. So anyone that has information on any of our cases, we would love for them to give us that information so we can talk to them. And we can try to make it anonymous if we
Yeah.
possibly
Yeah.
can.
Yep.
We can do as much as we can with the information to protect those people. But at the end of the day, our goal is to give closure to these victims and their families.
Because even a former gang member that has turned their life around, if they decide they really want to help solve this problem, they still might be scared that if if they try to solve this problem, that old gang might come back to try to get them, right?
Yeah, and there's never an excuse for someone to be murdered. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter if that person was dealing drugs or involved in gang lifestyle or other things like that. It's still not acceptable, and that person's still a victim, and that family was still a victim, and we want that family and those victims to have some sort of closure in those cases if we can do that.
Matt, anything? You guys want to say hi to anyone? Anyone listening?
Good.
Okay.
Well,
I just remind people because you never know. You go home and your family like, you didn't even say hi to me. You're on the radio show.
I'll say hi to my wife and
There
kids.
you go. Uh-huh.
Well,
All right. So thank you guys for coming on the show. I'm really excited about this. This is something that, this is when I became a police officer, this is kind of like what I love, like the investigation stuff. So when, it's just, I can't do it. So like I'm living vicariously through these guys, right? So
it'll be great when you solve one. It'll be
They're
awesome
gonna do
when
it.
you solve. Yeah.
They're going to do it. There's no doubt in my mind. So thank you guys for what you're doing
Thank
and the
you. Yeah,
effort.
thanks for having us.
And we'll continue to keep the community, apprised of what's going on and getting that momentum and generating hopefully some leads here.
Yeah, look forward to following that.
Yes, absolutely. So thank you guys. I will see hopefully a lot of people tomorrow, right? So looking forward to the event. So I hope everyone shows up. Come on out. It's going to be a great event.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, Fridays with the Finest right here on WRMN, AM 1410, and WRMN Radio on YouTube. Stick around for more.
For many years, Italian pizza